could almost feel the kindred spirits of those that had passed through going to freedom.
You always had a movement toward freedom because it's natural to want to be free.
Rich Newberg reports. Tonight, The Road to Freedom, with contributing reports from Miles Hairston. Preserving Black history in Western New York.
This is sacred. My ancestors were here, and they made it possible for us to be here, and our children need to know.
Good evening. There are times in history when great movements shape the destiny of a people, a time when passions for an ideal are shared by those willing to devote their lives to that ideal. The abolition of slavery was this kind of a movement, and Buffalo was in the heart of it. 150 years later, a new movement is beginning to take shape, one that preserves history, but also makes it come alive. Sacred places like this untouched area of the Michigan Street Baptist Church, where runaway slaves were hidden, are being protected, allowing us to connect with the past. And people are coming from all over the country to connect with our history, creating a heritage tourism industry that may help shape our economic future. Now, you may not be aware that it's happening, but after tonight, you may begin to understand what others know about us and why they are so eager to experience the road to freedom.
Sometime in the water, sweet Jesus, He carried me.
To this day, we struggle to understand how a country founded on principles of freedom could have allowed the enslavement of another human being.
And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave.
But only a cause as basic as freedom could have ignited the passions of people willing to risk all for a fellow human being. People whose calling often came from the Almighty. For many times it was through the churches in places like Buffalo where fugitive slaves found comfort and safety on the road to freedom. The Michigan Street Baptist Church still stands as more than just a monument to the abolition movement. It is still an active church, now Pentecostal. Its congregation is very small, but its bishop, whose grandfather was the son of a slave master and a slave, has all the fire and passion of ministers who inspired so many generations before to seek higher ground in their lives.
What keeps us coming? What keeps us giving and keeping these doors open, keeping us out of the red, making sacrifices and giving a little more than what we would have given if we were in a larger congregation? Because we realize I'm not doing it for the pastor. I'm not doing it for the officers of the church. And what I'm doing is not in vain. I'm doing it for the Lord. Hallelujah.
When I hear that mournful sound.
In 1845, blacks who had made their way to Buffalo from the South and settled here built the Michigan Street Church themselves. The first time here something like this had ever been done.
It had been built from the ground up. Even some of the early 20th century churches, black churches, were storefronts, or they bought churches that formerly were white churches in their communities. But for a long time, Michigan Street was one of the few black-built institutions in the community, and they took a special pride in that.
The church would come to play a vital role in the Underground Railroad. 5 years after it was built, President Millard Fillmore, ironically a Buffalo native, put teeth in the Fugitive Slave Act to try and keep the South from seceding from the Union. The church on Michigan Street would be a final hiding place for escaping slaves, who would then be ferried across the Niagara River to freedom in Canada.
To think about it being a place of security, a place of hope. Hope, that's the main thing, hope. The chains are going to be broken. I'm going to be set free. I'm going to be my own. you see. And I believe this is the thing that identified this church.
Some say the church owes its own survival to divine providence. It somehow escaped the wrecker's ball, as past members chose to move to new locations rather than tear the old church down. Few will deny there is a living spirit here, a feeling that is overwhelming to those who truly want to connect with history.
These walls speak to you. They talk to you. I feel it. I think they're talking through me right now because I feel so proud of this place. It's like, I love this place. You know?
Kevin Cottrell, who calls himself the station master for the Western New York links to the Underground Railroad, has introduced tourists from all over the country to standing treasures like the church. His Michigan Street Preservation Corporation had found the money to fix the crumbling roof, but the congregation didn't want it. Cottrell's group also wanted to restore the entire church.
All we want to ever do is to be the stewards of this church, which means that our job as stewards of this church is to maintain it, its historical integrity, to raise funds, to restore it, and that's as far as we go.
But some members of the congregation are a little leery that their church could become more of a money-making museum than a house of worship.
I see tourism as okay. That could be our gift horse, actually, as for outreach for the church, to put the church on the map, to make people aware of it. But at the other side of the coin, we want to be careful that we don't put aside spiritual things and the house of God for just tourism dollars and quite frankly, money and greed.
I don't want to hear all of your great dreams and visions, and you're doing nothing.
Bishop Henderson understands how much the church means to his flock, but also believes help must be accepted in order for the church to survive in this century.
We have to come to the bare facts that we can't do it ourselves, that we need help, and we have to recognize the help when God sends it and accept it without any qualms, you know.
The future of this old historic church may provide a vision for the future of the city, which may come to depend in part on heritage tourism for its economic revival and perhaps for its very identity.
If you do it from the economic point and that's all you see, it doesn't work. But if you're good at what you do and you give your life and your love and your passion into it, then the economic end that derives from that will take care of itself. I believe that.
This is what my mother played on, this is what I played on.
Jesse Nash is taking a walk back in time. He's walking through the home he was born in and recalling childhood memories. He's also helping others rediscover the legacy of his father, the late Reverend J. Edward Nash.
My dad was one of the ones who urged the development of a local urban league. He was at the forefront of the effort to bring the NAACP and the Urban League into existence in Buffalo.
Reverend Nash led the faithful at the Michigan Street Baptist Church for 6 decades. He was one of the local leaders paving the way for change during the birth of the civil rights movement in the early part of the 20th century. In this house on a street renamed in Reverend Nash's honor, pieces of history of the struggle for civil rights in Buffalo.
I suppose Mrs. Talbert told you about our meeting at Syracuse. Certainly had a great time there. They're anxious to have me return. But
Former Buffalo Common Council President George Arthur reads a letter from Harlem minister and author Adam Clayton Powell Sr. to Reverend Nash. The letter is dated December 1913. Powell was a prominent figure in the early civil rights crusade.
This is, precious.
Also discovered here, an announcement for a meeting of the Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Reverend Nash was on the committee. Another find, this letter sent by Reverend Nash to, among others, Booker T. Washington. These are among the hidden treasures of history Arthur and other members of the Michigan Street Preservation Corporation hope to find more of and save, along with the Nash House.
It's our only link back to the past. Physical link that we can touch, we can see, and we can come in and read letters.
Most of our black history in Buffalo is in shreds.
This is why preservationists feel the effort to save the Nash home is so important. It's an effort that has impressed Jesse Nash, who, by his own admission, is modest when it comes to touting his father's legacy.
I'm overwhelmed. I'm deeply overwhelmed. Yeah, you know, that's what I was saying the other day. I've never been affected by anything quite like this.
The goal is to refurbish this home built more than a century ago and turn it into a museum and research center for people studying black history. Preservationists say this is important because history lives here. From Reverend Nash's bookcases and desk drawers, they hope to find links to other prominent African Americans. People like Buffalo resident Mary B. Talbert, who in the early 1900s championed the Niagara movement, the forerunner of the NAACP in Buffalo. Also, they hope to find a link to W.E.B. Du Bois, who helped lead the push for civil rights.
This is my opening up a time capsule of the late 19th and the early 20th century in African American history and also the history of the city of Buffalo.
Just how much history is actually here? Well, no one knows for sure because preservationists haven't started to catalog the items in this house. But they will tell you this: their efforts to hold on to pieces of Buffalo's past will lead to a better future for today's children and their children.
Well, history is history. And to read it in the book is one thing, but to come and say, I'm standing where history was made, it means a lot.
Historians say if we are to move forward, then we must never forget the past. Preservationists say the renovations here, expected to start in the next 3 months and be completed sometime next year, will ensure no one ever forgets the Reverend Nash or his contributions that helped shape the city of Buffalo.
Buffalo's African Americans in the mid-1800s were a proud people.
You had a small community, but a tight-knit community that had international connections.
Ora Anderson Curry traces her family back to 1832, when her great-grandfather moved to Buffalo as a free man from Virginia. Benjamin C. Taylor would become the first African-American doctor in Buffalo. Her family were abolitionists who were well connected to the great minds and organizers of the time.
In 1843, there was a convention here in Buffalo, national, all black people.
Black newspapers with regional or national circulations would send out traveling agents to report on cities like Buffalo. Dr. Monroe Fordham remembers reading an old account of an agent from a newspaper called The Colored American.
He said that Buffalo was one of the most prominent, upstanding, progressive black communities that he had come across. There was an organization to help ferry people across the lakes to Canada.
And here, at the foot of Ferry Street, a group called the Buffalo Quarters Historical Society reenacts the crossing of the Niagara River every summer. Its founders had connected spiritually with the freedom movement.
All of a sudden, I was engulfed by this history. We have so much history here that people don't even know about.
Because it is international, the landing is in Fort Erie, word has gotten out far beyond Western New York borders, as far away as England. Yet Buffalo has yet to connect in a big way.
Yes, truthfully, it has taken off, but not in this vicinity. The attention is at a distance.
At Broderick Park, where the reenactment takes place, and where the river crossing is at one of its narrowest points in the region, there are plans in the works to make this place into a living memorial, complete with an amphitheater, reflecting pool, and memorial walkway, honoring everyone connected with the Underground Railroad.
This was not done by blacks alone. This was a humanitarian effort. We need each and every one of you now.
People will be able to buy bricks with personal inscriptions that will be laid into the park.
We thought the best way to get the community involved was to give them an opportunity to put their name in this historical setting in some way.
After the bounty hunters left and the marshals left and they didn't find anybody, your next stop would have been to come here.
Broderick Park is already on the tourist path. which includes original cobblestones and the stone wall that marks the historic site of the American Hotel, another refuge for runaway slaves.
Authentic historical sites add a dimension to a community that helps inspire the people in that community to want to do more and be bigger than what they are.
I'm going home to live with God.
Sometimes a simple marker would guide Harriet Tubman and the runaway slaves on their road to freedom. They knew what would happen if they got caught. There was no turning back on this mission.
A mission of people going underground through the Quakers, through churches, through houses, and it's important that they know that a history of Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman. She is referred to as the Moses of her people for leading 300 slaves to freedom. She was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, which ran through Buffalo en route to Canada. Today, Tubman's accomplishments are front and center.
You know, it makes me really feel great because growing up, the only people who really knew about Harriet Tubman was her family.
Arlene Olden is one of Buffalo's living links not only to black history, but the history of this nation. Olden is the great-grandniece of Harriet Tubman.
I think our children need to be taught more about their own history, where their people came from.
Harriet Tubman's legacy and link to Buffalo are very visible today. Behind me is Michigan Avenue, which has been designated Harriet Tubman Way. And now one of the city's oldest churches is also planning to honor the Underground Railroad's most famous conductor. Harriet Tubman was a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. She left everything she owned, including her home in Auburn, New York, to the church. And while she never attended Durham AME Zion Church here in Buffalo, members have a passion to preserve her legacy. They're planning a memorial garden.
We have to remind our people, both African Americans and others, of the great contributions that our people made in the days of struggle. And collectively, we hope to have a beautiful plan and program that when visitors come to our city, they will be able to see all of these sites.
The sites: Michigan Street Baptist Church, the Memorial Garden, and the Nash House. They would all be part of a proposed Black Heritage area. City leaders believe the heritage sites could attract thousands of tourists.
Because the story of Harriet Tubman cannot be told without the Canadian connection. We all know that, right?
The Freedom Trail moves seamlessly from Buffalo into Canada. Many African Americans ended up here in St. Catharines. St. Catharines, home of the British Methodist Episcopal Church. This was Harriet Tubman's church during her 8 years in St. Catharines, and it's another vital link for the Niagara frontier to Tubman and the Underground Railroad.
Okay, I just want to show you this plaque over here.
On this day, a tour group from New Jersey listens and learns about the history of their ancestors. For some here, history is more than a lesson, it's life.
The impact of it and the history that's behind it because of my ancestors and, you know, all the hardships they went through, the horrors and hardships of slavery. This church is now my life. It consumes me.
And what drives the people who are trying to preserve this history is the desire to pass this history along to future generations, not just during February, which is Black History Month, but every month of the year.
I believe that everyone should be able to learn about their ancestry. Some black kids don't even know that there was an Underground Railroad. They probably don't even know anything about the slave trade.
This is why so many people are trying so hard to preserve the history, links to the past that can help shape the future.
In Niagara County, you can travel the backwoods and creeks, tracing the paths of runaway slaves.
People come here and they say, I want to see the Underground Railroad, and this is when I say, there it is.
No rail tracks, just a lot of land. Carol Murphy's orchards were on the route, and she brings tourists and school kids onto her property and into her barn, where they witness a piece of history.
I mean, you have to stand here and think, this is where it happened, and just be quiet and feel what it would have been like to walk in here.
This 9 by 8 foot hole has become something of a shrine. It was a hiding place for escaping slaves. Here in Lewiston, there are yearly gatherings at the gravesite of abolitionist Josiah Tryon, who ushered countless escaped slaves into this family-owned house. It's the northernmost point and last stop on the Underground Railroad.
The Lord has brought us together today to honor a friend none of us ever met, but we knew as a brother.
Our region is filled with authentic reminders of a time that put civilization to the test. Across the river in Fort Erie, the so-called colored cemetery reminds us that this history is for everyone to understand.
There are slaves buried in the cemetery as well as whites.
It was only appropriate that Governor Pataki came to our neck of the woods, Buffalo's Michigan Street Baptist Church, to sign landmark legislation requiring the teaching of the Underground Railroad in every school system throughout the state.
We're using our history and making it come alive.
The Freedom Trail Act that Governor Pataki signed lays the groundwork for documenting and preserving the Underground Railroad sites throughout our state. And this will attract tourists from all over the country to our region. By preserving our history, we also preserve its lessons. And since freedom is the underlying principle of our nation, the lessons of black history and the road to freedom tell us something more about who we are as a people. For Milas Hairston, I'm Rich Newberg. Good night.
This is the place, not the site, but this is the place where the slaves were kept and were gotten over to Canada, you know.
I want to be able to say that I was part of that rebirth.
They're divinely inspired. They're motivated by a reason that's bigger than politics, that's bigger than anything you can put your finger on.